You may have the courage to look up.
We've had triumphs, made some mistakes.
The United States was founded on the principles of freedom and equality. But within the first few sentences of the Declaration of Independence, more than half of the population was left out.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their
Equality
Creator with
was
certain
envisioned by the founders as
unalienable
equality
rights,
among
that
white
others
males,
should be
and even that was revolutionary at the time. Much of United States history since that time can be seen as a struggle to extend these unalienable rights to people of color and to women. African Americans have struggled to free themselves from slavery, to remove the Jim Crow laws that made them separate and unequal, and to gain equal access and equal opportunity in education and employment. Hispanic Americans have struggled against the language and cultural barriers used to block them from positions of power and authority, and for the right to be viewed not as foreigners, but as full-fledged Americans. Native Americans have struggled to survive as a race and to keep their tribal cultures alive. They've struggled against a national consciousness that ignores their colonization in favor of a myth of the settling of the American West. Asian Americans have struggled against indentured servitude, 19th century laws forbidding Chinese immigration and citizenship, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and pervasive stereotypes. Women have struggled to attain the right to vote and for rights over their own reproduction. They have fought for equality in education and employment, and to defend themselves against domestic and sexual violence. What do these diverse groups of people have in common then? The experience of discrimination and of prejudice, the struggle against racism and sexism, the struggle for equal rights.
There is something that has been going on historically in our society when we talk about race. It uncovers some of our fears, and once we start practicing and getting used to uncovering our fears, as Malcolm X says, we will start to see each other with new eyes. We'll start to see each other as brothers and sisters.
You know, it's been a cardinal idea in American society for a long time that we're really just all the same underneath, that we're really all people, and we ought to be emphasizing our similarities rather than our differences. And there's nothing wrong with that idea, except that it seems to assume that differences are bad and that similarities are good. And to my mind, differences can be wonderful.
For example, you may have noticed that women are the ones who get pregnant. And so we'll never be similarly situated with men in that case, and we still find pregnancy discrimination. We still find disadvantages to women because we are overwhelmingly the caregivers of the very young and the very old. And while many of us don't want to give up the value of those roles, we do think that there needs to be some recognition that the roles that women play are valuable and have a value that is an equal contribution to the family and equal contribution to the society.
Prejudice and racism is deeply embedded in individuals, institutions, and in our society. And the thing that makes it so powerful is that it's an invisible veil. Most Euro-Americans or white Americans do not believe that race or racism is a powerful factor that affects their behavior. And what we're finding in terms of our studies and surveys is that racism now has become much more on an unconscious level.
If you define racism as a set of stereotypes of people based on their genetics, their biology, then I think that racism is not as active an ideology as it used to be. But if you understand that prejudice is a very broad and malleable disease, it's like a virus that mutates and survives in various different forms in different places, then your definition has to change a little bit. Because I think a lot of what we call racism isn't really racial in the strict sense of being rooted in biology as much as it has to do with cultural prejudice or ethnic prejudice, I'll say.
We're talking about things, though, that can be just as pernicious, like the fact that a person who is of a different ethnic group is followed in a store, is seen as more suspicious when it comes to hanging out or loitering out in a neighborhood, and might be Terry stopped, as you know, it's stopping a person and being able to ask them questions, and sometimes even being able to frisk them just because you think they match a profile.
As an Asian American, I look in the mirror, and every day I am aware that I'm racially, culturally different because I live in an environment that is structured and the values meant for only one segment of the population. And I think that one of the things that this national dialogue may be helpful is to begin to talk about what does whiteness mean to white Americans? What is their racial, ethnic, cultural heritage? And is there such a thing as white privilege?
We know everything about you, man. You teach us. You teach us all your foibles, all your failures, all your successes. You know, you really teach us your successes. You teach us all your history, your religions, your language, all your hopes, dreams, and desires, all your fantasies. You teach us everything about you. So we know you. What you know, you don't fear.
It's a thin line between love and hate.
You see, my great-grandfather said this, Luther Stanleyberry. If you don't know the forest, you will come to fear the forest. And what you fear, you will want to destroy.
Let me give you an image. It's a cliche, but it's an image.
Most clever, excellent likeness of rotund Chinese.
There's a little bunch of sweetness that I long to call my bride.
We've got to have a doctor. I don't know nothing about birthing babies.
It's dynamite, Ham.
Key Miss Abby, you notice something strange about Indians?
Get off your horse and head into the saloon.
You want to fill up, Mrs. Nussbaum?
Yeah, that's his wife's car.
You know you made me love you.
Anyone who grows up in any multi-ethnic or multiracial society, including American society, absorbs prejudices practically from day one. There are images that are thrown around all the time in the mass media, by parents, in language, casual remarks, conversation, in schools by other kids, by teachers, in textbooks, in newspapers, and so forth, that people absorb. Kids absorb them. They grow up with them. And I think that it takes a lot of real hard work by parents and by the society at large to teach tolerance, actually. To teach people not to judge others immediately by the color of their skin or the religious or national group that they belong to, but rather to see them as individuals.
When I was young, one of the things that I recall was standing out, talking to my brother Stan in Chinese in front of my, fifth or sixth grade classroom. The teacher came out, ready to close the door, overhearing us talk in Chinese, and said to me, "Daryl, you're in America now. When you're in America, you speak English and not Chinese." she didn't realize how humiliating that was for me. It made me feel ashamed that somehow there was something wrong in speaking my own language or speaking Chinese. And when you realize language is a carrier of one's culture, to be made ashamed of your language means that you're made ashamed of your culture, means I should be ashamed of myself. And I can truly say that that experience and similar ones made me lose my ability to speak Chinese, and I, to this current day, resent it.
I can remember being stopped by the police because I was in my warm-ups and out and about, maybe in my car, just going through the neighborhood, taking the Lake Drive in a rather decent car and in a nice neighborhood, and being stopped. And on one occasion, I remember being called boy, and asked questions about why I didn't stop sooner, and I was talked to in a loud kind of a voice, and it's those kind of more subtle, softer experiences multiplied by 1,000 that make out a different experience, a feeling like the other that many people still face today.
Some of them
Stereotypes can also do material harm to minorities. When a person is perceived as being inferior or incapable, they are less likely to achieve. Lower achievement leads to lower levels of education, hence lower levels of employment and economic well-being. The system of discrimination is circular. Dr. Guadalupe Quintanilla was one such victim of stereotyping. Her story started when she was a child.
I was given an exam in English. I spoke only Spanish. Naturally, I failed it. And you see, I scored so low that I wasn't even a trainable person. I'm supposed to be a vegetable. But I was placed in first grade because, you see, there were no classes for the mentally retarded in the area. So I was placed in first grade. And those were very painful years because I was already 9 or 10 years old. And when my son Victor started going to school, the system decided that my son was a slow learner. And I used to cry myself to sleep thinking, my son, he took after me. And then when my second son and my daughter were labeled yellowbirds, we didn't call them dumb, and we didn't call them retarded, we call them yellowbirds. And the bright one, and the smart ones, and the college-bound ones were the redbirds. And when the system decided that my children were yellowbirds, I decided that the system was wrong. And you know the first thing that shocked me? The first thing that I saw was that all of the yellowbirds had brown skin, and all of the redbirds did not.
Dr. Quintanilla learned to speak English at age 32, then went on to get her bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a doctoral degree.
Remember my 3 yellowbirds? I have 2 attorneys and 1 MD, all of whom graduated with honors from their respective institutions, and I'm very proud. But you know, when somebody calls my house and they ask for Dr. Quintanilla, which one? There's 4 of us, 1 retarded and 3 slow learners, according to the system.
These stereotypes are damaging to racial ethnic minorities along 2 dimensions, I think. One of them is that we're not given equal access and opportunity. If you believe that Asian Americans are inarticulate, poor with words, don't make good managers, that they're good with numbers, good in the math, you track them into a particular field. And in the workforce, for example, when I do consulting with business and industry, Asian Americans do not get promoted to higher management levels because of the perception that indeed they don't make good supervisors.
Racial preferences is a way to overcome the fact that blacks and Mexican Americans are not academically competitive with whites.
The other way that stereotypes are damaging is that racial ethnic minorities come to believe in those stereotypes. It's what we call the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Blacks, Mexican Americans spend much less time in school. They have a culture that seems not to encourage achievement, in which failure is not looked upon with disgrace.
And this can lead to issues of poor self-esteem, issues of what we call racial self-hatred, where individuals begin to truly believe there is something wrong with their own ethnic group. And it's a terrible thing for our young kids, racial ethnic minority groups, to grow up thinking that there is something wrong with who and what they are.
American Indian movement came along when every American Indian in North America, and which includes Mexico, were ashamed of being Indian, because all they ever saw was John Wayne, you know, shooting one shot over that way and killing a half a dozen Indians, and shooting another shot over there and killing another 12 or so. Or else, we were stoic selling pottery by the side of the highway. No one knew what an Indian was, and here come these guys who knew who they were.
What does being an American mean? For white Americans, I think, again, it is very invisible to them. To them, to be an American is to be a white American. And they aren't aware of that. They will deny that. And it can be all the way from riding in a taxi cab in New York, where the taxi cab driver will turn to me and say, "You speak really good English." And I'll say, "I hope so."
I've had every affirmative action benefit that any human could have. I didn't have to be affirmative action. It was simply, I just simply got this because I was a white Southern male. I had enormous advantages that nobody squealed about then, because we was getting the benefits.
I think that the problem is that we have a small group of people in this society, many of whom are white men, not all, but many, who are upper middle class, upper income white men, who have been given enormous privileges. And as a result, everyone who is not in that category, in some sense, does not have the same opportunity that those who've been privileged have.
Power tends to cause those who have it to want to hold on to it. And I think white males have really felt no true discrimination in this country.
David Rogers, now an Arlington furniture salesman, and 3 other whites filed suit against UT Law. The group claimed they were denied admission to the law school, while some blacks with lower test scores got in under affirmative action.
It seemed to me real clear that was not equal treatment.
It was the first challenge since 1978, the first full-blown substantive challenge to affirmative action, race-based affirmative action in student admissions since 1978. The case was filed against the University of Texas Law School by 4 Anglo applicants, all of them with very good credentials, all of whom were denied, as they contended, on the basis of their race. With identical qualifications, minority applicants were automatically admitted, Anglo applicants were automatically denied, and the question was, is that constitutional?
Constitutionality aside, it is simply wrong to give one applicant an automatic advantage over another applicant based solely upon the color of one's skin.
The Fifth Circuit, in the end, in 1996, ruled that that was not okay, that is not constitutional, even for the salutary purpose of creating a diverse student body.
No segregation in higher education!
They were shell-shocked. The court told them that they may not take race into account in admitting students at all.
In my entering class, we had 64 Mexican Americans. Last year we had 42. This year we have 26. I am seeing a 1/3 decrease in each entering class, and if the trend continues, we may have 0 by next year.
Go back! So while these students and their administrators all want to attract more minorities, that's unlikely unless the courts level the playing field. And unless that happens soon, diversity here may become a word they study in history class.
The Chinese have a character for crisis, which is a combination of 2 characters, the character for danger and the character for opportunity. And I look at the Hopwood case as a crisis, but one in which there's both danger and opportunity. The danger in the Hopwood decision is that, at least in the immediate short term, we are resegregating institutions of higher education. The opportunity is to take that problem and try to think, How can we fix it?
Affirmative action is a very unpopular idea in America at this point, by and large, because I think most, looking at the polls, most white Americans at least think that it means that unqualified or less qualified minorities will be promoted over more qualified whites. Less qualified women over more qualified men, and so forth. It's interesting, though, that some focus groups and polls have been done that have found that most black people think that without affirmative action, less qualified whites will be promoted and hired over more qualified blacks.
All affirmative action and equal opportunity is about is saying, don't judge me on my color. Give me a chance to come in on equal footing with everyone else and let me prove myself.
I think on a level playing field, we'll do just fine.
So both blacks and whites have the same end in mind, that is fairness, merit, but they see different ways of getting there.
So today we're all going to stand strong. We're not going to leave this law school until our demand is met.
When you have people even questioning affirmative action, not to say that we need to look at affirmative action and see its shortcomings so that we can improve it, but it has come to this point where even some of the more progressive people look at affirmative action and still find places of reverse discrimination, which to me is an oxymoron. How could there be reverse discrimination?
When whites stand up and say there's reverse discrimination, I want to hit them in the mouth. Here's reverse discrimination. Now you know what reverse discrimination is.
Over 90% of all of the top jobs in the Fortune 500 companies are held by white males, probably more than 90%. The playing field is simply not level. When you look at biases and prejudices that come out of cases like Texaco, where executives in the highest offices were caught on audio tape by one of their officials planning to destroy evidence to defeat a discrimination lawsuit, and yet Texaco has a beautiful four-color video about how fair Texaco is in rights for minorities and advancement for women and others. There's some glass ceiling there, They say you can go higher, but you really can't.
It's only 30 years since the civil rights movement really began to accomplish what it was set out to accomplish. It's not a very long time. It's not even a generation. So to think that the playing field is level, that the slate has been wiped clean, that families who've lived in poverty and been exposed to inferior education are suddenly going to have college-age children who start out exactly at the same place where, say, middle-class or upper-class white families are, I think it's just unrealistic.
The true predictor of success is the opportunity to succeed, and that was proven by a recent study done at the University of California, Davis Medical School, where they tracked students who had been admitted to the university over the past 20 years. They found that the affirmative action admittees did not do as well the first 2 years of medical school as those who had been admitted through the academic track. But as soon as they became residents and as soon as they became physicians, their records were indistinguishable. So they can catch up. The tests are telling us that some people enjoy better preparation to take these tests. Some people have access to coaching that enhances their scores. Some people have gone to better schools. But all that tells us is what their past opportunity has been. It doesn't tell us what they're capable of doing in the future. How can we rethink the whole issue so that everyone can enjoy greater access to educational opportunity?
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
In many people's eyes, racial issues are one of the critical problems facing the United States.
Look in your school or at your workplace and see someone that's hurt by racism.
A national dialogue on race to explore possibilities for racial healing has been initiated. cities and towns across the nation are sponsoring meetings where members of all races can come to speak out and to reach across the barriers that divide them.
Discrimination truly, truly weakens us. It weakens us as a nation, and I believe it weakens us too as a nation state. It just has an extensive effect, I believe, all across the board in the country. And it's really something that we got to resolve. And once we resolve it, I think that it will actually begin to help us kind of refine our soul again as a country, to make good on this American exceptionalism that we like to talk about.
I hear from our friends around the world, of course, that when the United States sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And I know very well from working with women around the world that what we do in our country has an impact on their lives. We really are seen as a model for democracy. And many of us who believe in democracy believe that that includes very clearly the concepts of equality and that they go hand in hand.
This country has faced up to its anti-Semitism and is still trying to do something about it. Then it faced up to slavery and the treatment of black people, mistreatment, and it's still trying to do something about it. It looked at its migrant worker and its treatment of migrant workers, faced up to that deceit. Then the big one, it faced up to its deceit concerning the terrorization and treatment of women, and still trying to do something. Right now, this country's embroiled in this deceit concerning homosexuality, and it's trying to do something about it. It's addressed all those issues in my lifetime. No other country has ever done that.
The struggle is equally important as the outcome. The doing is as important because I have to live with myself. But whether this represents only a drop in the bucket is another matter. Each and every one of us needs to find what it is that pushes us in what I call the direction of social justice.